Humanity has seen a lot of times when it seemed doomed. It happened during the Cuban Missile Crisis, it happened during the Second World War, and in the old days, it happened during the bubonic plague. But once in a while, there comes a generation of thick-skinned men and women who redefine the new normal. Those are wildcard generations, and that is what my talk is about today. Consider the generation of kids born in the US around 1920. World War I is over. The United States is on its path to become the most important economy and country in the world. Women are getting to vote for the first time. Radio and cars are connecting the whole nation for the first time again. It's a great time to be an American. Fitzgerald is just writing The Great Gatsby, and it's just got published, something which is a symbol of 1920s optimism. Now, Gatsby, unfortunately, was a rank sentimentalist, and his tragedy, in many ways, is reflective of tragedy of an entire generation which believed in the American dream. At the end of the book, Gatsby ends up with a bullet instead of Daisy, and an entire generation of Americans end up with the Great Depression. This generation of Americans, while growing up, saw their parents scramble to put food on the table. Before they could at least legally get a drink, Hitler had conquered most of Europe, and Axis powers threatened the very conscience of humanity. This is the same generation which fought and won the Second World War. 420,000 Americans died in remote corners of the world for the fellow man. But the class of 1920 was not done yet. They ushered in an economic boom in the US which lasted till the 1970s. The space program they built put a man on the moon in the 60s. And, not to be undone, they exported democracy to the wider world. Tom Brokaw, who is a legendary NBC news anchor, called this generation of Americans the greatest generation, a generation which defined the 20th century. Ladies and gentlemen, we today live in their shadows, looking for the next wildcard generation, looking for the next generation which will change the world. Hence, I'm here today to talk to you about three things, and three things only. First, where the hell is the next great generation, or the greatest generation 2.0, as we call it? Second, what is their great war, and will they care enough to fight for a greater cause? And third one is very simple. What can you and I do to help them fulfill their destiny? So let's begin. Let's talk about generations. I believe they're changed and shaped by circumstances. Let's take a step back and think about human history. From the Bronze Age till 1700s, humanity was a very linear equation. Any country or society, its wealth or GDP was determined by how many people it had, because most of the people were simple farmers. Now, something happened 2 centuries ago, which was the Industrial Revolution, which changed that linear equation. For the first time in the entire history of humankind, Asia was displaced by the West in a similar fashion to how iPhone displaced Nokia. I mean, it's a very simple analogy. And for the last 2 centuries, we have been trying to catch up, but we have been unsuccessful. But something changed in the mid-90s with the advent of the internet economy. And this is the economy which for the first time allowed a kid in New Delhi to compete directly with a kid in New York on a relatively equal platform. And that is a huge, huge change, because for the first time, numbers started to matter. And let me explain how. The Chinese and Indian kids call it, so this generation which I'm talking about, the Generation Z, are roughly 2 billion in size, and they were born after 1995. They're colloquially called as Generation Z, and 45% of them live in India or China. In my view, this is the generation which will be called the next wildcard generation when history books are written 100 years down the road. Let me explain why, and the reasons are twofold. First, numbers. The Chinese and Indian kids outnumber their American counterparts by 10 to 1. Now this difference, this delta, did not matter much for the last 200 years, because the West packed a machine gun for a knife fight. We could not win. But that is changing with the advent of the internet. And second, let me give you an example. My generation, which is the generation of millennials, and the generation before me, has already started companies like Flipkart and Alibaba and Snapdeal and Ola, etc., which are already beating their Western counterparts in India and China. And that is something new. But we all, most of the people sitting here, are digital immigrants because we have adapted to the internet rather than grown up with it. The generation post 95 is the first generation in history which has grown up with the internet. They are, in technical terms, called the digital native generation. And they, in my view, these two factors will make them a unique generation which will change the world as we know it. Ladies and gentlemen, I think this is the generation in Asia which is at the right time and at the right place. And I really, really think they're going to win. That said, winning is not everything. I mean, success has more than one parameter. And in my view, empathy is something which underlines any generation which changes human trajectory. Think about the greatest generation in the US. They are the guys who grew up in the Depression era and fought the Second World War. These are the guys who fought, lived, and died for a greater cause. If we look around ourselves, what is the big problem of today? What is the great challenge of our era? In my view, the answer is simple, which is climate change. No matter what research report you pick up, the human cost of climate change will be measured in hundreds and millions of human lives lost over the next century. And those are stark, big numbers. But, we all have been around for a time, and we have been told about climate change for a while. But a collective response to it has been, you know what, this is how it happens, and we'll solve it when we get there. But that is very human. Think about Second World War. 60 million people died, 3% of human population. But till the Pearl Harbor attack happened in the US, the United States was very happy with its pre-war neutrality. And that is how we are as a race. We do not act till the time there is a gun to our heads. And that is how we have always been. But now, I think we have a gun to our heads. And this is the generation which has to fight the fight we are in today. And I do think they will fight with all their heart. And that is the stuff which legends are made of. Let's take a quick poll here. How many in the audience were born in 1980 and 95? Okay, that's a significant majority. And that is the generation which a lot of people call the millennials as such. And I am in a millennial. And my parents still think I have no work ethic. My parents think I spend too much time re-editing my pictures on Facebook. And that's what the perception is, ladies and gentlemen. And now think once about the problems the Generation Z has to solve. They have to figure out a way to solve and stop global warming. They have to figure out what is the next alternative to petroleum. They have to figure out a way for the next green revolution. And in their spare time, they have to figure out a way to beat ISIS. Now, that is the times we live in. And yet, despite all that, we think that all they do, the teenagers of today, is Google cat pictures on the internet all day. And the generation of today is really worried. We really think, millennials and the generations before me really think that the teenagers of today don't really understand how grave the situation really is. And look at this. This is the top 5 Twitter accounts in the world. You start with Katy Perry, Justin Bieber, Barack Obama, Taylor Swift, and YouTube. When Justin Bieber starts to beat Barack Obama in popularity, that worries a lot of people. But unfortunately, I'm not one of them. I think every generation somewhere in their heads thinks that they're the coolest thing ever. We are wary of whatever comes next. Think about it. The generation from 60s and 70s who raised their hands, these are the guys who led the first wave of economic liberalization in India and China. My generation of the millennials, we are the ones who are at the forefront of the technology boom today in India. We are the guys fighting for a change in the political system. We have fought and protested for issues like same-sex marriages. We have beaten the odds again and again. And think about it. What is so unique about the new generation which is coming up? A good example is the example of Malala Yousafzai. Now, she is the youngest Nobel Prize winner ever. At the age of 15, she became a target of the Taliban because she wanted a girl's right to go to school. She was targeted because she wrote a blog on the BBC website, which later became a documentary. Now, She's a brave and a very unique girl, and she's done incredible stuff. But the question we need to ask ourselves today is, why were there no Malalas in 1980s Afghanistan? Why were there no brave boys in East Germany who wanted to beat communism? Why? What changed? In my view, the answer is very simple, which is connectivity. Malala had the global reach which made her a target because of the internet and the media. And when she was targeted and she was almost killed because of the shot in the head, the global media and the global politicians gathered around her and made her a champion of human rights. Her case is a classic example of what is so different about the Generation Z. In my view, ladies and gentlemen, I don't think these guys are lazy or narcissistic. A lot of you might be parents and you might hold that view. I don't. I just think these guys are courageous, these guys are connected, and these guys do care about the wider world. And I think when the time comes, there will be more Malalas in the times ahead. The only thing which worries me, and this is the biggest worry, 100,000 reasons to worry about the future, but in my view, the biggest worry of the day is how we are training these guys for the future, for the times ahead. We all know that these guys have to fight a massive, massive fight. But are we training them well enough? So let's look at the education system of today. The education system as it stands today was designed in the 19th century. It's a relic of the industrial era. Think about it. The way we train our kids is not very different from how televisions or cars are assembled. You get in at the age of 4, and every year you keep getting promoted, and some guy in the corner office decides what features will be added onto you. Unfortunately, every year we train and produce millions and millions of standardized government-approved workhorses for the economy of today. That is the reality we live in. Now, the bigger problem is that the bureaucrats who manage the system think they're managing a Truman Show. Now, this was all okay in the 20th century because 20th century was an era of globalization. Now, what does that really mean? It means that you take an idea which worked in one part of the world, say the telecom industry or chemical fertilizers, and export it to something else, some other part of the world, and it works. And the education system we have today is designed to supply workforce to that very economic model. But that model is history, and we are living in a new era. Let me explain using a concept which Peter Thiel has been talking about. He's the co-founder of PayPal and early investor in Facebook. Now, what he says is that let's assume globalization is measured on the x-axis, and bear with me, I'll get to the funny part. Globalization is measured on the x-axis, wherein you take an idea and export it globally, and completely new revolutionary ideas are measured on the y-axis, something which he calls going from 0 to 1. For example, invention of the internet at CERN in '91 was a 0 to 1 kind of a movement, whereas Flipkart and Alibaba copying the Amazon example in Asia and doing really good job at it is an example of 1 to n, basically taking an idea and emulating it in a different context. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in testing times. We live in an era where we have unprecedented and immediate problems to solve. And we need to train the next generation to solve these 0 to 1 kind of problems. Think about it. We're talking about problems like figure out nuclear fusion, or figure out interplanetary travel, or figure out a new currency, a new global currency to replace the dollar. These are the problems of our day. We need a new generation of Einsteins, Ambedkars, Azads, Ben-Gurions, Oppenheimers of the day. Instead, we are getting a generation of lab rats who can only look at the wheel in front of them. They can't look left or right. They can't innovate. They can't be creative. Rome is burning, and we all know it. We all know the situation at hand. The choice is ours if we want to be bystanders or we want to do something about it. Well, that said, I am an optimist. Despite all the challenges of the economic and the education system, the security concerns, and the ecological nightmares of today, I do think that we live in an era of unprecedented economic and political possibilities. This TEDx takes its name from the old walled city of Delhi. But bear in mind that the first city of Delhi was created much before Christ. The walled city of Delhi was actually the 7th edition of Delhi, created in the mid-1600s by the Mughals. We all are sitting here today in the 10th version of the city of Delhi, created by the Britishers in the early 20th century. Now, the story of Delhi has a broader, story in it, which is the story of a human capacity to evolve. And that is what I'm betting my money on. I think that the recent rise of Delhi is reflective. The recent rise of Delhi as an economic powerhouse, is reflective of India and a broader ambition across Asia to capture lost glory. There used to be a poet in 18th century Delhi called Mir Taki Mir, and he said beautifully that the Delhi streets were not alleys but parchments of a painting, and every face you encountered looked like a masterpiece. Ladies and gentlemen, I do think, and I really do think, that the next generation has a rendezvous with destiny. And every time I have a casual conversation with someone from that generation, I do see a masterpiece in making. Thank you very much for your time today.